Good evening. My name is Timothy Clancy. This is a videotape presentation of the brief we're going to be delivering as the morning hackathon. This is the 2023 Mark Paich Hackathon. This is Team Semper Relaxo, consisting of myself. We took the generative AI tools and society, and we specifically are evaluating the hype harm control dynamics of disruptive technologies, including runaway breakout risks. Now, I did do an earlier video that walked through the causal loop diagram. That's a little bit longer video, but this is going to be focused on that 5-minute policy brief presentation. So the research question really gets into two parts. What are the dynamics of hype, harm, and control in disruptive technologies? This is common to any disruptive technology, but importantly, what makes AI a novel risk given its self-generative potential? So we are using 3 reference modes in the form of memes. The hoped, realistic, and feared. The hoped mode is, of course, that we have beneficial AI growth with no harm to society. It's a sort of a happy day where you can go on your motorcycle and ride off in the sunset with the AI. A more realistic reference mode might be a tug of war or an arm wrestling match between benefits and harm trade-offs being managed by the control function of the reaction to the harm. And the feared is SkyNet, Terminator, runaway breakout. We're all going to die. So the hype harm control simulation from the CLD, again, I'm not going through the causal loop diagram, but we do have a full causal loop diagram and a dynamic hypothesis that we built this. This is a simulation model. It's an exploratory model. It does have unit consistency, first order control. It is capable of generating novel behavior. So it's the basis, and I think one good thing about this model is it helps you can model a lot of different scenarios in this in any sort of disruptive technology. But we're really going to focus on 3 today, looking at that hoped, realistic, and feared simulations for the AI. Now, the hoped no harm growth mode versus equilibrium decline. The model does start in equilibrium. You can disturb it, and you disturb it with a slight industrial kickoff. That sort of the kicks off the hype cycle. You can also sort of say that industry failed to kick off the hype cycle, and that's a declining. So you see here on the left the AI capabilities. It has the ideal growth with no harm. It's got a nice growth cycle going up. Interestingly, the model is capable of producing a counterfactual. So assuming there was no industry support, no kickoff with stable diffusion last year, you have a declining industry, no harm, but you can see that it's declining to a lower capability. And on the right are the people using AI. Again, exploratory model, aggregated numbers. So that's not like 400 people, but that's just an aggregated unit of measure. But you can see the equilibrium and the disturbance for both the growth and the decline. Again, no harm. This is the hope scenario, beneficial. One of the novel contribution is how hype differs from diffusion. In most diffusion models, there is a compounding feedback effect amongst the user base, the adopted users who word of mouth spreads and they tell each other and they sort of it spreads like a sort of a contagion among the users. In a hype cycle, there are multiple compounding feedback loops, both on the user base and on the producer base. So not just are the users getting interested and riled up about this, but with stable diffusion, ChatGPT, everyone's piling into this market. And there's a third compounding feedback effect that every new use case generates to that hype. So it's not like you're inventing one kind of technology that solves one thing and has one hype cycle. You're doing it in language, you're doing it in images, you're doing it in music, you're doing it in video, you're doing it in software code, you're doing it in all sorts of errors. And each one of those can help further the hype and a compounded effect. So we really are focused here on hype cycles, why I call it the hype harm control model, rather than a diffusion cycle. And you can see in the hype here how the growth in hype is aligned with the growth and decline of the base model. AI capabilities. So the realistic scenario is hype leads to harm. So this case, we have 2 growth models. One has a harm of 25% and the other has a harm of 75%. What we wanted to show is that you're going to have harm in some scenarios. And even in the 25% harm, you still have people generally adopting and moving through it. We'll show why in a bit. If you have too much harm, though, adoption drops. People don't want to use it. They shy away. They're not interested in using it, and it never recovers. So the important thing here is not necessarily if there's harm, because there will be, it's how much, at what strength, what power, and sort of what velocity of change it's hitting people at, that sort of pace of change they're having to adopt to. Because harm leads to control. This is the third part, hype, harm, control. When harm occurs in a disruptive technology, there's going to be a control-based response. This could be government regulation, industry best practices, and you can see here the controls on AI reacting to the harm scenarios, and on the right you can see the alignment. So it's not, even though the alignment started out with, say, a 25% harm, you can see where it adjusts up and kind of settles into a different weight. Likewise, the 75% harm really had to jack up. So the AI alignment, or excuse me, it was 75% harm means 25% good. That one on the right is the zero is and to one is all benefit to society. So 75% harm means it starts at 25%. That governmental control kicked in. Yes, it was able to make it a higher benefit, but by then you'd lost the hype, you'd lost the people, and you weren't able to get the spark off. The feared scenario is the runaway AI. This is where the AI capabilities take off. And you can see on the left, this is compared to that same growth mode. So we took the growth mode of the 25% harm, and what we did is we allowed the AI to sort of gain self-generating capabilities at a very high rate. Now we had to juke this to get it to happen. So this isn't a very realistic scenario, but it's important to understand the dynamics. On the right, this is the change in AI capabilities from human-generated content. I want to be very clear on that. So what you're seeing is at zero, no one's adding capabilities. At positive, they're you know adding new capabilities. At negative, they're removing capabilities, perhaps from a government. And you can see here in the runaway scenario, there's a period where that government control, as the harm increases of a runaway scenario, it drops down to zero and then it drops down and then it spikes up to zero. At that point, you've done all you can. There's the human controls. There's no more they can give. The capability generated is on that autonomous, unaligned AI, and that leads to this sort of finding here. You can see the hype cycle walking through on the upper left. Um, with a runaway AI, hype is down to zero, people are down to it. So no one's excited about it, no one's using it, and the harm continues to grow. This is very important as a novel finding to make sure people understand. When you have self-generating capabilities in the event that it goes in a breakout, those autonomous unaligned capabilities aren't going to necessarily be reachable by governmental control, industry regulation. There's scenarios where it's hidden itself on the internet, or maybe it's lurking in computers. Regardless, you can't manage. They're two separate stocks. Even though what the AI generates for itself helps the AI capabilities, you can't reach that through the human participants. And this creates the dilemma of how do you control this? Now, I want to be clear, we're not forecasting SkyNet. There are limits to growth. We didn't model them here about other mechanisms of control to directly go after the AI, the limits to growth within the AI itself. But this leads to policy considerations of how likely are you to detect and identify where that AI capability is residing? Because it may not reside in the human industry that produced the backbone of it originally. Conclusions: always trade off between harm and disruption within hype cycles of new technologies. Second, the velocity of harm relates to power response of government and control. So high hype equals rapid harm equals backlash. Where we're at, right? Some initial disruptive harm can be absorbed by governmental response, allowing growth to continue once realigned. We see that in all this, by the way, this is common to all disruptive technologies. Now, the third point, this is specific not just to AI, but anywhere you see self-generated technology. If they can write their own code, if they can perpetuate themselves, if they can develop themselves and innovate themselves, that removes that key lever of control where you're no longer able to reach in and sort of regulate that activity. In the feared scenario, the government shut down the AI industry, the hype went to zero, the user went to zero, but the harm continued accumulating exponentially. It's unlikely again. We had to do artificially high latent supports to get that scenario to work, and we didn't model all the limitations of growth. It's an early stage model. So that's it. Hope you have a good night, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this hackathon. Take care.